Good morning, everyone. My name is Hermann Pretorius. I am the Deputy Head of Policy Research at the Institute of Race Relations, and I will be chairing this morning's meeting, this morning's discussion with renowned economist Dawie Roodt and my colleague, analyst and researcher for the Institute of Race Relations, Mr. Nick Babaya, will be having the discussion with Mr. Roodt. Throughout the talk, do not feel offended if I mute your mic. I think it's, from my experience over these lockdown weeks, it's just easiest if we make sure that only one or two people at a time could speak. And I think we all agree that that should primarily be Mr. Roodt and secondarily be his conversation partner, Mr. Babaya. That being said, the formalities being over and everyone being welcome, I give it over to Mr. Babaya to start this conversation with Dawie. Thank you very much. Nick, I do think your microphone is on mute.
Apologies for that. Can you hear me now? Cool. Thank you very much, Herman, and thank you very much, Mr. Roodt, for being here today to discuss with us. We'll jump right into the questions. Dawie, taking into account the circumstances and the uncertainty of the economy, what do you foresee as the effect on jobs and businesses? And to that end, do you think we should stop this lockdown?
Sure, there's a lot of questions. Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's actually quite weird that this has become the normal that we can talk about on technology like this, and it's all of a sudden the fourth industrial revolution is on top of us. All right, there are two questions. The one is the effect on jobs, and the second one is that should we stop this lockdown or not? Let me just have a look at answer the first one on jobs. But of course, before you can answer the question on jobs, you have to just have a bit of an idea of what's likely to happen to the South African economy. And I can give you some details if you really want to, but I've had a look at my estimates for economic growth, and before the virus, and I think it's very important to understand this, is that the South African economy was in a recession already, and in fact I would call it a crisis, especially on the fiscal side, and we were already in a recession, and I'm afraid this virus is going to be blamed for everything from now on. Although the real reason why the economy has been going through a difficult time before the virus was because of mismanagement of all sort of things in the South African economy. So what I had a very weak economic growth in any event before the virus, and then of course there's no way to accurately predict what's going to happen to economic growth. But essentially what I've done, I looked at previous crises and I simply superimposed that on my existing economic model. And of course I keep on adjusting that every day, sometimes more than once a day. And at the moment I have economic contraction around about 6% for the year in total. Now, with a bit of luck, we can get out of the recession by the end of this year, the last quarter or so. The third quarter should be more or less flattish, if we're lucky, but the fourth quarter, with a bit of luck, and there are all technical reasons, we could report some positive economic growth. So talk about economic contraction around about 6%, that's what I expect. Many guys, I read the report this morning, somebody expecting 10% contraction or even more. Now, if the economy contracts by that, and based on previous experience, that means that we're probably going to lose in the region of about 1 million jobs. In fact, slightly over 1 million jobs. I've got 1.1 million jobs that are likely to be lost. So unemployment is then likely to go up to, say, 11 million people or so by the end of this year. Additionally, we are talking about, and I saw the Reserve Bank is mentioning 1,600 businesses that's going to close down. I don't understand how you get to that, because depending, of course, on your certain assumptions, but if you assume, say, 5 or 10 people working for a company, and you talk about 1 million people losing their jobs, then we are really talking about many thousands of businesses closing down, and not only 1,600 or so businesses. So we're talking about many thousands of businesses closing down. So you also, more than 1 million jobs are likely to be lost, and many thousands of businesses are likely to be closed down. Then should we close the lockdown, or should we stop with the lockdown? I think we have to open this debate, and we have to talk about this. I think what we all must understand is that this thing that we call wealth or economic growth is the thing that correlates best with everything that is good for humans, for humankind. If you look at rich countries are countries with high life expectancy. Rich countries are countries with very good education levels. They've got good infrastructure, everything. So wealth, or then economic growth, correlates with everything that is good. Poverty, on the other hand, correlates with everything that is bad. And given the fact that the South African economy is in a recession now, and a very deep recession, we are going to see an increase, and a substantial increase in poverty. Now, let me give you one example. The average income of the average European is 3 times that of the average South African. The life expectancy in Europe on average is roughly about 20 years longer than in South Africa. And I like life expectancy as the single most important economic variable out there. High life expectancy is good. It always correlates with everything that's good in an economy. So if we can somehow reach the level of income of the Europeans, we can extend an average, based on this simple example, we should be able to increase our life expectancy by around about 20 years. So people are saying that it's a choice between lives and the economy, and I disagree with that. I think a healthy economy is also an economy with healthy people. And it's the same thing when you talk about whether lives or the health of the economy, is actually the same thing. And what I believe we should consider, at least, and very seriously consider, is to change the approach. There are certain people that are obviously vulnerable, the elderly or people with underlying conditions, and my approach certainly will be to isolate them and to look after them and make sure that they are protected as much as possible. But we have to open this economy up. We have to get this economy growing as soon as we absolutely can. I think the first reaction by the president was probably the right reaction. That was best practice at that time, given the information we had at that time. But we've got more information. We understand what the mortality rates are much better anyway than in the past. And I do believe that we should try to open this economy as quickly as we possibly can, because it will lead, and it is going to lead to a huge increase in poverty. And poverty is nothing but a death sentence to many, many people. I'm not talking about people starving to death. But if you've got poverty, you don't have proper infrastructure, and ambulances can't get to A, B, and C and things like that. Poverty is a killer. In fact, poverty is the biggest killer on this planet.
The government ran out of money, you could say, long before this pandemic arrived. In fact, I think we could still be talking about various economic problems, even if there wasn't a COVID-19 pandemic. We had Finance Minister Tito Mboweni announced a large deficit, even in a country which can't even reach a single percentage point of GDP growth. So taking that into account, what is the current situation with the government's fiscal accounts moving forward, given that situation and now that we're going to contract in GDP?
Yeah, everything is going to change. You're absolutely right. The state accounts were in a complete, total, unsustainable mess because of mismanagement of the fiscal accounts in previous years, because of silly things like keep on bailing out South African Airways and many other of these sort of decisions. Imagine if we had 16 billion rand. That's the last that the Minister of Finance, the bailout to South African Airways, 16 billion rand. Imagine if we had some extra 16 billion rand that we can spend on poverty relief now, to give food to people, to young children. Yes, so it was completely unsustainable beforehand. The deficit by the Minister of Finance was expected to reach 6.8% of GDP. That was far too optimistic. My estimates was anyway that we're probably going to run the under collection. My economic growth before the crisis was 0.5% for 2020. So there was probably going to be another under collection in terms of revenue to the tune of 80 or 90 billion rand. That's before the crisis. Now with the crisis, I'm afraid, and the economy contracting quite significantly, we're probably going to see an under collection in terms of revenue of 200 or even 300 billion rand less collection than the original budgeted estimate. We all know there's huge pressure on the spending side. And we will hear what the Minister of Finance says a little later today, if he's going to try to spend a little bit more on a couple of very important things, I guess. So let's see what's going to happen on the spending side. But the bottom line is that fiscal deficit is probably going to reach a new record high. I have, at the moment, a fiscal deficit of approximately 12% of GDP, depending on what the Minister says today. And that means that we're going to reach the debt levels. We're going to breach the 70% to GDP debt levels within this year. So we're going to see debt levels ballooning, getting completely out of hand in excess of 70% to GDP. And of course, that is excluding Eskom and other parasitals as well. We haven't got an answer to what's going to happen to Eskom yet. And my big concern, the opportunity obviously here, is to make use of this crisis to restructure the fiscal accounts. This is a crisis where we can once and for all get rid of South African Airways now. I think everybody will agree with that. That cannot be a priority. We have to give people food. We can't keep a dead airline in the air. So this is an opportunity to restructure. But the political issue here is that we need to address this army of civil servants, and they are simply overpaid, and to reduce the wage bill is going to be extremely difficult. But now certainly is the opportunity to make certain structural adjustments. Everybody's going to take pain. It's only fair that the civil servants also take some pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have spoken about that once or twice amongst ourselves here at the IRR. But given that really dismal-looking fiscal situation, what are your thoughts on the potential for an IMF bailout in South Africa?
Yeah, everybody's talking about an IMF bailout. We just got a loan of $1 billion, I understand, from the BRICS Bank. Before you remember, when you borrow money internationally from institutions like the IMF or the World Bank or the BRICS Bank for that matter, you essentially are borrowing dollars. That's what you're going to get. They are not going to lend you rands. They are going to lend you dollars. So you must ask your question before you go to any of those international institutions. Of course, you can borrow things. In the case of the IMF, you will be getting special drawing rights. But the point I'm making, if you go to those institutions, you will be getting dollars. So before you borrow dollars, you must ask yourself the question, so what do I want to buy with dollars? Now, there are basically two things that you can buy with dollars. You can pay off existing loans, dollar loans, or you can import stuff. You can import medical equipment or medical supplies from another country, and therefore, you need to pay them in dollars because they're not going to accept the rands. So, and I think, and that's the plan with the BRICS Bank, is to use those dollars to import medical supplies. I understand that, so that makes sense to me. But to go into the IMF and borrow $10 billion worth of a loan from the IMF, for example, what are you going to do with this money? Because all you can do with this money, you're going to put it in the South African Reserve Bank, and the reserves will increase. And you still, unless you spend it somehow internationally. And one of the good things that the government has done the last couple of years is that they did not borrow too much internationally. Currently, the reserves at the South African Reserve Bank is in excess of $50 billion. The outstanding loans of the state is around about 10% denominated in dollars, and those loans will fall due over the next couple of years. They're not all going to fall due straight away, and there's more than sufficient reserves at the South African Reserve Bank to cover those loans when they fall due. So no, we don't need dollar reserves or dollar loans. There could be one reason why we may want to go to the IMF, and I guess that's a valid reason. If you want to go to the IMF, borrow money from the IMF, and use that as a stick to get your other political partners in line in order to force through certain structural adjustments. That's a valid point, I guess. But we don't need the dollars, and there's no need to go to the IMF for dollars, certainly not at the moment.
Thank you. I'd just like to briefly remind our journalist friends that the final 15 minutes of this will be for questions. So if you do have a question, just keep it in mind, and at the end there may be an opportunity to ask. Mr. Roodt, in connection to that, what is your view on the South African Reserve Bank's policy, and how would you view their handling of this crisis?
Yeah, essentially there are two options or two instruments or two levers available to the authorities. The one is fiscal policy, and the other one is monetary policy, and a couple other things, but those are the two most. We all know that the fiscal policy is just not available today, and it's not available because of the reasons we've mentioned, because of mismanagement in the past. So fiscal policy. There's a bit of a...
Apologies. Can everyone please mute their mics?
I do apologize. I have muted the offending mic.
Cool. All right. So the fiscal accounts are simply not available because of previous mismanagement. We can use some money here and there and spend a little bit here and there, but it's not going to be nearly enough to support the economy. In fact, if we really want to support the economy, we should have to spend 300 billion rand or even more in some sort of support package to get the South African economy going. We don't have the money. We can't do that. And we can't do that because of previous mismanagement. That's unlike the monetary authorities, the Reserve Bank primarily. Now, in the past, many economists and many analysts and many other people criticized the South African Reserve Bank for running a tight monetary policy ship. Many people think that the Reserve Bank should have cut interest rates earlier. Fortunately, they did not. And I think Lesetja Kganyago did an excellent, really excellent job in the past. And because he ran a tight fiscal shop in the past, he's got the opportunity and he's got the leeway now and he's got the capacity now. He's got the dry ammunition now to come to the party and to support the South African economy. And we saw things like, for example, him cutting interest rates, making some adjustments in terms of the capital requirements, the liquidity requirements for the banks, and even entering the bond market. They started buying bonds in the secondary market, and that's a bit controversial. But looking at all these measures that the Reserve Bank has put into place, I think he's done most of I think he's done all the right things, the South African Reserve Bank. And he did that, and he could do that because he ran a tight monetary policy approach in the past. The big danger, of course, especially with the Reserve Bank entering the capital market now, is that there's always going to be difficult to get out of that. And they used about R1 billion last month to buy government bonds. So the real question is not whether they should have participated and did what they did. I think they did the right thing. The real question and the real test is going to be after the crisis of the Reserve Bank and withdraw from this. But the real irony in all of this is that Ace Magashule was calling for quality easing, to use his words. And that is exactly in a way what the Reserve Bank is doing now. I know the Reserve Bank is saying, no, this is not quantitative easing, but let's be honest, they are making use of freshly printed money and they're buying government bonds. Yes, in the secondary market, not in a primary market, but essentially what they're doing, they are printing money and, well, buying government and giving in a weird kind of way, giving the money to politicians to spend. But I disagree with the Reserve Bank. I think it's a good thing that, and I certainly would have done the same. But the test is going to be when they need to withdraw from that, and hopefully they will withdraw rather sooner than later. But it's a dangerous thing. Very dangerous to do.
Going a little bit to a different topic now. Obviously, South Africa's economic woes, even without the pandemic, can be ascribed to a number of factors, regulatory, tax. I think one thing that has been quite hot in the news recently is that aid from the government will still be distributed based on race-based affirmative action and broad-based black economic empowerment type policies. The government is insistent on still continuing this through the crisis. What is the effect of even more BEE type policy from an economic standpoint going to be during this difficult period of time for the economy?
Yeah, in the past we could, and in fact, I was very much in support of BEE in the beginning years for obvious reasons. And gradually over time, I became disillusioned by that. And because, it simply doesn't make sense to me when you find exactly the same black billionaires on the same boards of various companies. That cannot be BEE, or that cannot be empowerment. That cannot be right. And I also know that if you really want to empower people, you need to start where it really matters, and that is with proper primary education. That's the most important thing. If you really want to empower people, our primary education in South Africa is horrible. It's not because of money. It's because of mismanagement and everything that goes with that. So if we really want to empower, we have to start where it matters, and that's with primary education. Unfortunately, a few individuals are getting the benefit of BEE. So now I'm completely against BEE. But under current circumstances, we were in crisis, and now we've got a crisis on top of a crisis. And now we still have politicians with certain political and social agendas and ideological agendas, and making use of that in this crisis. I think it's immoral. I just think it's completely and totally immoral. You cannot force your ideological ideas and social and political ideas upon the rest of South Africa under these sort of circumstances. No, I think that is, I do not have another word, but that it's completely and totally immoral to do that under these sort of circumstances.
There's a little bit of a grim picture that I suppose we've painted, and we've come to the end of the questions. I'd like to just ask one thing, and that is, in this crisis, in these difficult times for South Africa, as an economist, is there any silver lining to this? Is there anything we can do to turn a bad situation into an opportunity for good?
Yeah, well, like I've said, I think certainly a bright spark here, or bright star here is the South African Reserve Bank and the way that they've been managing this. I think they're doing an excellent job. I must also tell you that the president has started taking decisions. That's good. He's acting presidential. I must also tell you that the health authorities, I'm quite impressed with them. They're very transparent. I'm very, very concerned with the extra powers to the bureaucrats, like Tsele, for example, saying that he wants to extend this ban on alcohol even after the crisis. I mean, my concern is that you give politicians, you give bureaucrats more power, and they're not going to give it back after the crisis. And that's my concern. And it's our responsibility to make sure that after the crisis that we get back all the rights that they've taken away from us. But the obvious the opportunities here are for everybody to see. This is an opportunity to restructure things that are wrong. This is an opportunity, and there cannot be any argument that we have to rid of South African Airways now. You must have money for important things. You cannot keep an airline alive when people are literally hungry out. This must be an opportunity to restructure the civil service and all sort of matters. This must be an opportunity to restructure Eskom as an example. Restructure Eskom now. Get it done once and for all. Everybody's got to take fame. And I think that is certainly the opportunity that we have now. And on a slightly different note, is that it seems to me, and this is actually when we started talking, we're talking on this medium, for example, now, and all of a sudden the fourth industrial revolution is all over us. And all of us are being forced to start making use of this new technology, and life is never ever going to be the same again. In fact, I've never been this busy. I'm in full contact with my people all the time. We have got meetings all the time, far too many. We work far longer hours than ever before. But the downside to that, and I think we also have to understand that, is that people with the skills, and people with the means to participate in this modern economy, they will to an extent be cushioned by the economic effect of this economic slowdown. And people in squatter camps, poor people without the necessary skills, they are going to be people that's going to be very hard hit. And it's probably going to lead to a further increase in inequality in South Africa, and that usually leads to social and political tension and so on. But I think change, it can be painful. Change, this is certainly going to be painful, but change is not always bad, and quite often there are at least certain things that will be much better after this virus. And I think what we're doing now is an example of that.
Well, I think that's a lovely note to end off the main questions on. Thank you very much, Mr. Roodt, for being here. We will now move over to questions from any of our journalists who are here watching, and I will hand over to Hermann to run that part.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much, and thank you, Dawie, for even in this very busy time, giving us some of your time. I can imagine the problem you face now is everyone has a question and everyone expects the economist to have an answer, and now you cannot even leave the office because that would mean leaving your home and possibly getting arrested. So in terms of journalist questions, I suggest that journalists please alert my attention as Mr. Vegter has done in the chat function. A quick explainer: if you move your mouse over the screen where this mosaic of initials and Mr. Roodt's face should currently be appearing, a little bar appears. To the far right of the bar, you will see a little red button. That means you can hang up. Then to the left, there's a show participants button. And then to the left of that, there's a little speech bubble that you can click on, and that will open the function or to the so-called chat function to the right of your screen. I can promise you it is purely coincidental that everything I'm trying to explain is on the right of the spectrum. Now, in terms of questions, let me first go to Ivo Vegter of the Daily Friend and Freelance Brilliance to ask his question. Ivo, you're welcome to unmute yourself and verbally put the question. Ivo? Right, I seem to be having some trouble with Ivo. I can't hear anything he says. So let's go to the next question from Donald Presley, please. Donald, are you with us?
He seems to say that he's got a trouble unmuting him. Maybe you should try to unmute him.
I can't.
Am I here?
Yes.
Sorry, this is all new to me. I'm confused. Yes, I've heard what you said, Dawie. But we've had a lot of background noise during this period, which seems to indicate that actually the reformists from the Magashule camp seem to be holding the upper hand, and the SACP and COSATU with their view of how to reform, which is very different to the orthodox reforms that we want, that you want. Do you think that Ramaphosa actually is going to have the backbone to restructure the SOEs properly and privatize? Do you think anything's going to be done properly, or are we just going to muddle on as we've done all along?
Thanks, Donald. Yes, I think that's excellent, but I think a political analyst will perhaps be in a better position. But let me just give you my views on that. Is that the president, the decision to lock down the country was a huge decision. I mean, that's a major thing. The president did that, and he actually took a decision. I think that was a good thing. But something happened yesterday, and that is that the president, what's her name again, from communications, that he sort of put on 2 months leave or whatever, 1 month unpaid and all that. And everybody applauded him on that. And I think the president is gradually finding out that he is actually a very powerful person. Now, my criticism in the past was that he doesn't take part of it, is that he doesn't take decisions. He's always waiting for economists, and an economist of 19. If you put 19 economists into one room, you're going to have many, many different views. So we need a leader. We need a leader to stand up and say, listen, it's going to be tough. Follow me. It is going to be painful, but we're going to get out on the other side better. And gradually, it seems to me as if the president is growing a backbone. Gradually, it seems to me as if the president realizes that he's a very powerful man. I understand there was this press release by the Tripartite Alliance, the ANC, and COSATU and the Communist Party. But it seems to me as if gradually, especially the last couple of weeks, as gradually they are losing, becoming less important. Yes, you're absolutely right. Before the crisis, it was clear that the Magashule camp was winning and they were consolidating their power. But I think exactly the opposite is happening now. So that is just my view. That I think the president is slowly getting a little bit, he's getting on top of things and he's getting a little bit more powerful because he realizes that he's a powerful person by the things that he's decided and by people actually doing what he's telling them to do. Like the minister asking, apologizing for actions as a good example.
Excellent, thank you, Dawie. It reminds me of when Margaret Thatcher was asked what she was going to do after politics. She said she's going to start a small business and call it Rent a Spine. So moving on to Brandon, I'm going to read out the question. It is in Afrikaans. Watter impak het die verbod op die koop en verkoop van drank en tabak op die ekonomie? In short, what impact does the ban on the buying and selling of alcohol and tobacco have on the economy?
Dankie daarvoor. Well, the impact on obviously those businesses will be affected. The liquor, the guys selling liquor and the guys selling tobacco products and so on, so they will be hugely affected. If we go down the value chains, the wholesalers will probably be a little bit less affected, and the manufacturers will probably be a little bit less affected still. But those guys will be hugely affected. But I think there are a couple of other trends that are important as well. One is that that the retail sector was already in changing quite dramatically. We saw what happened to Edcon. We saw the announcement by Foschini, for example, and there's a huge change taking place in the way that we are buying stuff. And I think this lockdown is certainly going to accelerate a trend that was already well established, and that's that people are moving away from bricks and mortar and buying somewhere else. They're buying on the internet, as an example. But those industries will be hugely affected without a doubt. Is that a good thing? I'm not so sure. In fact, I think I can't see why people should not be allowed to have cigarettes or an alcohol under these sort of circumstances. I think people have been behaving themselves quite well. I think the argument is that you don't want people to drink because they're going to ignore the lockdown and they're going to start making trouble in the streets. And I don't like that kind of attitude by politicians telling me that I'm not allowed to drink. So I'm against that. I think you should be allowed. For example, you go to the supermarket. But right next in the aisle, right next to the cabbage aisle, there are some toys for kids or puzzles for kids. My kids are at home. I want to keep them busy, but I'm not allowed to just lean over and buy a puzzle for my kids. I think it doesn't make sense, that sort of stuff. But my main gripe here is that politicians are telling me I'm not allowed to drink. They think I'm irresponsible, and I'm down to one bottle of brandy only. I don't know it's going to last that long.
Dawie, I do apologize. I'm going to ask another question of Brandon in Afrikaans. He has asked very nicely that he needs an Afrikaans answer for his radio station. But perhaps as an aside, I don't think we should read too much in the fact that in the same answer you said your kids are at home and you want to be allowed to drink. Brandon, jou vraag is hoe lank na die inperking sal die ekonomie weer begin groei?
Dankie daarvoor, Brandon. Ek is bevrees dat ons in 'n baie laag groei traject is. Die Suid-Afrikaanse ekonomie gaan inkrimp die eerste kwartaal en in die tweede kwartaal en moontlik ook in die derde kwartaal, maar ek dink weens 'n klompie statistiese redes en goed wat ekonome noem basisredes, is daar 'n kans dat ons in die vierde kwartaal die ekonomie iets wat kan begin groei, maar ek is bevrees nie veel nie. Die realiteit is ons is in 'n baie laag groei traject. Daar's 'n klomp statistiese lawaai en as die ekonomie in die vierde kwartaal weer begin groei, moenie dink dat die ergste is verby nie. Dit gaan vir ons baie jare vat om hierdie ekonomie terug te kry waar dit was 'n klompie jare terug.
Uitstekend. Thank you very much. Ivo Vechter, please, you are free to ask your question.
Yes, and I think it's working this time. Morning, Dawie. The entire purpose of this lockdown seems to have been to prevent the ICUs, in particular, from being overwhelmed. Right? There doesn't really seem to be any other reason. The notion of flattening the curve means that equally as many people are going to get sick. We're just trying to postpone some of them so that the hospitals can cope. Have you done any sort of analysis on what the cost would have been to ramp up the availability of ICU beds and ventilators and so on in temporary facilities like Nasrec or the CCITT in Cape Town, as compared to the cost to the economy of the lockdown? So by locking down, are we getting value for money here?
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to do it straight away. I haven't thought of that. I will certainly try to do that. Maybe some other things that I think are important as well is that South Africa is a very young population. If you look at the statistics, we all know it's mostly elderly people that die from this, or people with underlying conditions. And because we're a young population, mostly, we are probably going to be less affected, or at least in terms of people having to go to the ICU. I've also spoken to some friends of mine that are medical specialists, and they say that if you go on a ventilator, your chances are very, very slim that you're going to survive. So even I know Donald Trump, for example, is ordering a lot of companies to start manufacturing ventilators. But once you have to go on a ventilator, chances are you're not going to make it in any event. But that's an excellent one. I will try to do some calculations on that, and I'll come back to you. I think I've got your email somewhere. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dawie.
Excellent, thanks, Ivo. Then I will go to Eugene Goddard. You can ask your question, and then Gabriel Krozer, I will read out your question thereafter. Eugene, if you are speaking very softly.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's it, yes.
Dawie, thank you very much for your views on the IMF. A lot of people might say it's unavoidable that the government turns to the IMF for a bailout, in which case it will have to come with structural reforms to certain policy decisions that the government seems to have been inflexible and changing. Once again, although you don't seem that an IMF bailout is unnecessary, could you perhaps just tell us what this could mean for the government in terms of structural reforms?
Yes. Well, okay, let me just explain something on how the flow. Let me give you a simple example, and this is the reason why I don't believe we need a loan from the IMF. Say a platinum mine exports platinum. They are paid in dollars, and they will take the dollars, because we don't use dollars in South Africa, we use rands, so that the dollars will end up with the South African Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank will print rands, literally, and give the rands basically to the mine. Of course, there are some intermediaries in between, but by exporting platinum and receiving dollars, you're increasing the rand money supply via the process that I've just explained. If the Reserve Bank is unhappy with the increase in the money supply, they will conduct all sort of operations. It's called open market operations, to withdraw some of this liquidity out of the financial market. Now, if you go and borrow if you go and borrow dollars at the IMF, for example, exactly the same is going to happen. The dollars will come in, it will be converted. If the government borrows the dollars, it will be converted into rands, and the rands, the government will end up with the rands, and the Reserve Bank will need to sterilize much of this by doing exactly the same. Or the Reserve Bank can simply print more rands. They don't need dollars to print more rands, and that is exactly what they're doing in the secondary market, in the bond market. But like I've said, one of the benefits of taking an IMF loan is that you then have a stick to make sure that your other alliance partners accept some of these structural adjustments. Now, which are these most important structural adjustments? And without a doubt, the single most important structural adjustment, what we need to implement now, we must cut back on state spending. The state must spend less. And that inevitably means you must spend less on people. What we need now is perhaps in the short term an increase in child support grant, and we can talk about that, because I think that's a possibility, but it's a bit of a dangerous one, or some of the grants generally speaking. But you must make use of this opportunity to reduce the wage bill. You must use this opportunity to reduce the number of people that are being paid by Eskom, and to reduce their salaries one way or the other. I get emails every day. This morning I got emails from people, and it is heartbreaking to hear from people that they literally are going to sit on the street next week. They don't have money. I hear all the time of people that are firing people. I'm going to have to get rid of 5 people, or I'm going to get rid of 10 people, or whatever. I'm going to cut my wage bill by 50%. Everybody, you've got a choice. You take a 50% haircut, or you go and find another job. Those are the kind of things that is happening at the moment. And we cannot expect the private sector to keep on taking all this pain, and the civil service not. This is the kind of structural adjustments that we need to implement. And that is we must spend less. Of course, there are many other things that need to happen as well. We have to look at the tax structure. We have to look at the state-owned enterprises. And we have to look at BEE even. Those sort of things need to happen as well. But the simple answer to the structural adjustments, we must get the state to spend less. And that inevitably means spending less money on people. And if you do that, people get angry. That's the political challenge.
Thank you. I'm going to read out a question written by my colleague, Gabriel Crozer. He prefaces it with the possibility that this might be a naive question. If we got a large dollar-denominated loan, could we not use that to buy rands, convert into rands, for local stimulus spending? The scenario in mind is one in which the necessary reforms are made in the next few quarters, which turns the economy around, which in turn strengthens the rand, which in turn makes it easier to pay back dollar-denominated debts rapidly at an effective discount. Why is this scenario implausible?
Yes, well, let me give you that's totally possible that we could follow that sort of approach, but we don't need the dollars to start this approach. You can simply get the Reserve Bank to start printing money without having the dollars. You don't need the dollars for the Reserve Bank to start printing. And I think most economists will say eventually this is going to lead to very high levels of inflation, and I also believe that is going to lead to inflation, and it's actually going to undermine your economy over time. I don't think inflation is going to be a short-term issue. That's part of the reason why I don't have a problem with the Reserve Bank currently getting involved in a capital market. They can put in a lot of liquidity. Monetary policy, we must remember, you can pull on the string, but you cannot push on the string. What I mean with that, you can get people to borrow less by increasing interest rates. And if they don't want to borrow less, you increase interest rates even more. And eventually people are going to say, listen, this is too expensive, I'm not going to borrow money. But when you cut interest rates to encourage people to borrow, they don't necessarily start borrowing. You can cut to zero, or basically just below zero, based on some international experience recently. But you can cut interest rates basically to zero, and quite often people will not borrow because they're simply scared. And that's where we are now at the moment. So even if you do spend this extra money, people are not going to, remember, money is created through two steps. The first step is that the Reserve Bank creates money, and we call that high-powered money or base money. And the second step is for the private sector to lend the money out and to borrow the money. And that becomes a credit cycle, and that adds to the money supply. And if people don't, you can create as much money as you like. If banks don't want to lend and people don't want to borrow, it's not going to lead to the second round effect of the money creation process. And that's part of the reason why it's not going to work. But the point is essentially that you don't need dollars for the Reserve Bank to create more money. Unfortunately, if you do create all this money and you let all this high-powered money lie around in the economy, and when the economy starts growing one day, then the seeds are there for a rapid increase in money supply via the private sector credit extension mechanism, and that eventually can lead to inflation. But we don't need money at the moment. That's not an issue. There's sufficient liquidity in the financial system. We need trust in the economy. We need confidence, and I must tell you, confidence levels are very low now. And you need confidence in order for money to work. You don't need money alone. You need confidence on top of that as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go for a last question to Donald. I'm still going to read it out. He did communicate it here to me in text form. The question is, what sectors, and let me caveat this with all the necessary legal understanding that we don't want to give financial advice, binding financial advice, or anything in that regard here. The question is, what sectors should an investor look to for growth in a reformed economy? Move away from bricks and mortar, etc., to online, etc.
Yeah, excellent. And again, that is a trend that has been becoming quite apparent before this crisis, and that is that the world was changing, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but essentially two changes were happening. The world was moving more into the tertiary sectors, moving away from the primary and the secondary industries, moving into the tertiary sectors. And that consists of, amongst others, things like, for example, the service industry. So that was one trend that was obvious. You can look at rich countries, including in South Africa, in fact, it is the tertiary sectors that are growing, and it's not the primary and the secondary sectors. And unfortunately so, because we especially need a lot of growth in the secondary sector, that's manufacturing, because we've got all these unemployed people. So potentially that is a sector that can do something about South Africa's unemployment levels. So that is one trend. The world is becoming more concentrated in an advanced space, which is essentially the tertiary industries. A second thing that has become quite clear is that the world's becoming more digitized as well. And in fact, many things, including some of businesses in the primary industries, do find themselves in the tertiary industries and in the digital space today. Let me give you one example. If you look at somebody like, for example, a geneticist. If you go back 10,000 years ago, what person was the closest to what we called a geneticist today? And I think the answer must have been a farmer. Because a farmer 10,000 years ago was the person that knew plants and animals and stuff like that. Today, a geneticist works in a university. They analyze genetic genome, and they put that in some sort of information package, and they email it to somebody else. So geneticists today literally digitize life, and they manipulate genomes and things like that, and the real value add happens in the service industry. So that's an example where a primary industry becomes actually part of the digitized service industry. So that's my answer to you. I believe in the future is that the industries that are going to benefit from this are typically somewhere there. Certain things, like for example, maybe barbers are going to be negatively affected, and certain industries, like for example, retails will be negatively affected. We understand that, but I certainly think that the future, and we've seen this already, will be the Googles and the Microsofts and this what is this thing we're working on? I think this is a part of a Microsoft program as well. That is where the industry, the future is, and that's where the real important investments are going to be. Of course, it doesn't mean that you can't look for nice primary industry businesses like mines and so on. There will always be, but the future, without a doubt, is going to be in the service industry and in the digital space as well.
Thank you. I was begged with some sincerity to ask the last question. That will be the last question, after which I will then close this meeting. Dawie has already given us his allotted time. It is from Mona at Chartered Wealth. I agree with you that pressure should not solely be on the private sector for salary cuts to avoid unemployment, and that the government itself should start cutting spending in the public sector also. With that being said, when you make reference to possibly looking at BEE during this time, exactly what aspect of it are you referring to? And in your terms, how will that aid us at this time?
No, what I'm really specifically referring to is it tourism? I think the Department of Tourism that still have that. And I read their report yesterday. That's something I think under these sort of circumstances that you simply cannot do. What we have to understand, all of us, that we're going through a very, very difficult time. If we want to define things in terms of race, under these sort of circumstances, we're completely missing the plot here. Everybody needs to stand together, and we can talk about this thing later on after the crisis, and we can discuss how we want to empower people and whether we want to do it on a race base, which I believe we shouldn't be doing. But at the moment, we are in crisis, and I think it's certainly a luxury now to talk about things like, for example, race-based policies at the moment. No, this is crisis. It's a crisis situation. Let's deal with the crisis first, and then we can talk about it again. I guess that's more or less the way I think about this.
Excellent. I think I agree with Dawie on that point. At this point, we should roll out COVID-19 testing, perhaps not pencil testing. Right. On that note, thank you all very much for your attendance today. I thank especially the friends of the IRR that who make this sort of events possible. I urge you to look at our report called Friends in Need, COVID-19, How South Africa Can Save Lives and Livelihoods. It's very relevant to what Mr. Roodt has discussed with us and the questions we put to him. And perhaps to end off, I would say that, Mr. Roodt, I absolutely agree with you when you say that you cannot try to save lives without trying to save the economy. And on that note, that is exactly why the Institute of Race Relations will focus on saving lives and livelihoods. The two cannot be disconnected. Thank you very much, everyone. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you.